I need to thank my mom for getting arrested at my job interview. When I was 10, my mom marched onto the playground and pushed a kid off a swing after he cut in line and took my spot. She later grabbed his arm while he sobbed and made him apologize in front of everyone. And I just stood there watching. I thought it was normal. Mom had always been involved. But around middle school, I quickly figured out that the things she did were a little more extreme. That day, I came home with a B on a science project she had helped me with. She was furious. She called my teacher and spent 40 minutes arguing until my teacher gave up and turned it into an A, just to get her off the phone. High school was even worse. She completely edited a college application essay that one of my teachers said was already perfect, and ended up getting me waitlisted. And it wasn't just school either. When my mom found out I had a crush on a boy, she found his parents on social media and asked them to set up a date. They were instantly creeped out and tried to politely tell her no. But that was a mistake. You see, no was the word she hated the most. She stretched her fingers and took a deep, angry breath before proceeding to hurl insults into their chat, until they had no choice but to block her just to make her stop. The rumor about my crazy mom took over the entire school, and for the rest of the year, people were scared to even talk to me. Even my friends. But now that I graduated college and started job hunting like a real adult, I thought maybe she'd cool down and give me space. But I was so wrong. She found my resume on my laptop and changed everything. She bragged about herself in the reference section, added skills and experiences I didn't have, even replaced the email and phone number to hers. I only found out when one company emailed her instead of me. When I confronted her, she said, I was just polishing it. But some of the things she had edited actually made me sound like a terrible person instead. The worst part was when she started harassing the HR departments of the companies I'd applied to. One recruiter actually told me during a phone screen that my mother had called twice that week. I didn't get a second interview. She scared off 2 internship opportunities the same way, calling supervisors to follow up on my behalf, sending additional materials they didn't ask for, basically hovering so aggressively that they assumed I couldn't function independently. I begged her to stop, but called me ungrateful. I just felt bad knowing that nobody wants you, she told me. But she backed away after that and actually let me do things on my own. And finally, I got an interview for my dream position. The salary was great, the benefits were even better, and there was plenty of room for growth. I decided not to tell my mom about it. The morning of the interview, I told my mom I was meeting a friend for coffee before driving straight to the office building. The interview had just started, and it seemed to be going great. Olivia, the current marketing director, was funny and very professional. It seems like you'd really be a great fit for the team and company, she started saying when the doors to her office suddenly opened and my mom walked in. She didn't even knock. She just sat down in the empty chair beside me and explained that she wanted to be there to support me and make sure I presented myself properly. She turned to Olivia and smiled sweetly. Don't mind me. Just continue. Olivia looked confused and tried to continue it professionally. She continued where we'd left off and asked me about my previous marketing experience. Before I could answer, my mom cut in. She complained that the question was too vague and told me not to answer. Olivia looked at me with wide eyes while I stared back with an apologetic look. Her jaw clenched. She tried redirecting the question back to me, but my mom kept interrupting, correcting my answers, adding details that weren't even true. She even called Olivia's questions basic and uninspired. How she expected more from a director-level position. Then she turned to me and started asking me difficult interview questions, only to get angry when I couldn't answer. That's when I had it. I was done. I interrupted my mom mid-question and told her to leave. Her face turned red with rage. How dare you speak to your mother like this? You're clearly not ready for this job if you can't handle a simple interview, she shouted, as if she were the one in charge of hiring me. Olivia stood up and pointed at the door. You're the one who's being rude. Before you stepped in, I was already practically handing your daughter a job offer before you stepped into this room and started running your mouth and taking over. But this ends here. I'm the director, and you're no longer welcomed here. Olivia called in security. My mom gripped the door frame, screeching about discrimination and abuse as they dragged her out. The arrest gave Olivia the full picture of what I'd been dealing with. She offered me the job and said anyone who could stay composed through that deserved a chance. She even helped me find temporary housing. So for 3 months, my life was exactly what I'd always dreamed it would be. I worked hard, made real friends, built my career without anyone interfering. But then came the court date for her trespassing charges. I thought it would be simple, just a formality, until Mom's lawyer stood up and presented her evidence against me. He pulled out a thick stack of papers and started laying them across the table in front of the judge. Screenshots of text messages between me and my mom, emails where I'd asked for her help, photos of us together at my college graduation. He pointed to specific messages where I'd said things like, "Can you look at my resume?" Or, "I'm so stressed about this interview." He told the judge that I had a long history of depending on my mother's support, and that she was simply responding to my requests when she showed up at the interview. He made it sound like I'd invited her involvement and was now turning on her because I didn't get the exact outcome I wanted. My chest got tight watching him twist every normal mother-daughter interaction into evidence that I was the problem. The judge looked at the documents and said we'd reconvene in the morning to give both sides time to prepare responses. I walked out of that courtroom feeling sick. The next morning, I sat in the courthouse waiting area on one of those hard plastic chairs that make your back hurt after 5 minutes. I kept checking my phone even though I had nothing to check. People walked past in suits carrying briefcases and folders. Everyone looked like they knew exactly what they were doing except me. Then I saw him. A man in an expensive gray suit walked straight toward me carrying a thick folder under his arm. He had that kind of smile that salespeople use when they want you to trust them. He stopped right in front of my chair and held out his hand. "I'm Joaquin Watkins. I represent your mother. Do you have a few minutes to talk privately before the hearing starts?" Something about the way he asked made my stomach drop. I didn't want to talk to him at all, but I also didn't know if I was allowed to say no. He gestured toward a small conference room down the hall, and I followed him because I couldn't think of a good reason not to. The conference room was tiny with just a table and 4 chairs. Joaquin closed the door and sat down across from me. He opened his folder and started pulling out papers. Printed screenshots of text messages between my mom and me from the past 2 years. Page after page of them. He'd used a yellow highlighter to mark certain parts. I saw my own words staring back at me. "Mom, can you help me edit this cover letter?" And, "I don't know what to wear to the interview." And, "Do you think this resume sounds okay?" He spread them out across the table so I could see all of them at once. He tapped one of the highlighted sections with his pen. "You asked for her help repeatedly. With your resume. With interview preparation. With job applications. Your mother was simply responding to your explicit requests for support." My hands started shaking. I wanted to explain that those requests came with context he wasn't showing. That asking my mom to look at a cover letter was different from her taking over my entire job search. That I'd been conditioned my whole life to include her in everything or face her anger. But he kept talking before I could find the words. He pulled out more papers. Emails this time. Old ones from college where I'd thanked my mom for helping me with an assignment. Messages from high school where I'd said, "Thanks for talking to my teacher about my grade." Every polite thank you I'd ever sent her, printed out. And stripped of all the context about how that help was forced on me whether I wanted it or not. He arranged them in a neat row next to the text messages. "Your mother has a documented history of providing support that you explicitly requested and thanked her for. The incident at your interview was simply an extension of that same supportive relationship. She saw you were nervous and wanted to be there for you." I felt my stomach drop like I was on a roller coaster. He made it sound so reasonable. Like my mom was just a caring parent and I was being dramatic. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands on the table. "Here's what we're proposing. If you acknowledge in court that your mother was trying to help you and you agree to drop any potential civil claims against her, we'll accept a plea deal with minimal consequences. Probably just probation and maybe some community service. No jail time. You get to move on with your life, and your mother gets to move on with hers." I stared at the papers spread across the table. My own words used as weapons against me. I opened my mouth but nothing came out. Joaquin waited with that same practiced smile. Finally, I managed to say, "I need to think about it." My voice came out shaky and small. I stood up fast enough that my chair scraped against the floor. I grabbed my bag and walked out of that conference room without looking back. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. I found a quiet corner near the bathrooms and called Olivia. She answered on the second ring. I tried to explain what just happened, but the words came out jumbled and panicked. She told me to stay exactly where I was and she'd make some calls. 10 minutes later, she called back and said, "There's a prosecutor named Violet Garza handling your mom's case. She's in the building right now and she's coming to find you. Don't talk to that defense attorney again without her present." I waited in that corner watching people walk past. Then a woman in a navy suit came striding down the hallway looking at her phone. She had dark hair pulled back tight and she moved like someone who didn't waste time. She looked up and made eye contact with me. "Are you Olivia's friend?" I nodded. She walked over and held out her hand. "I'm Violet Garza. Tell me exactly what just happened." I described the conference room meeting and showed her the texts Joaquin had sent me with photos of some of the evidence he'd shown me. Her jaw got tight while she looked at them. When I finished talking, she looked mad. Really mad. "That's completely inappropriate. He ambushed you before you could give testimony. He's trying to manipulate you into undermining the prosecution's case before we even get started." She pulled me further away from the main hallway where fewer people could hear us. She explained that my past requests for help didn't justify my mother forcing her way into a professional interview and disrupting it. That context mattered. That a pattern of behavior mattered. She asked if I was willing to testify about the full pattern of my mother's interference, not just what happened at the interview. All the incidents from childhood through now. The playground, the teacher calls, the resume tampering, the HR harassment. Everything. I realized this was my chance to finally tell the complete truth to someone who had the authority to actually do something about it. Someone who might actually believe me. I said yes. Violet checked her watch and said, "I'm going to request a postponement. We need time to prepare a comprehensive case and you need time to get ready for testimony." We walked back toward the courtroom together. Inside, Violet spoke to the judge and explained that new evidence had been presented to the victim without proper notice, and she needed time to prepare an appropriate response. Joaquin tried to argue, but the judge cut him off and rescheduled the hearing for 2 weeks out. Violet said that was actually good because it gave us time to build a strong case. I left the courthouse feeling both relieved that I didn't have to testify that day, and scared about what the next 2 weeks would bring. Back at work on Monday, I had to tell someone in HR what was happening. I couldn't just take random days off for court without explanation. I found Milo Beckham's office and knocked on his door. He was the HR manager who'd helped process my hiring paperwork. He looked up from his computer and waved me in. I sat down and tried to explain the situation without crying. I told him about the interview incident, the arrest, the court case, and that I'd need time off for the rescheduled hearing and possibly other court dates. He listened without interrupting, and then started typing notes on his computer. He said, I'm documenting all of this in case your mother tries to contact the company again. We're going to set up protocols for how reception should handle any calls or visits from her. They'll have your photo and hers on file. If she shows up or calls, they'll document it and notify me immediately. You focus on your work and let us handle security. That afternoon, I had a project meeting with the marketing team. I tried to focus on the presentation about our next campaign, but my mind kept drifting back to the courthouse and those highlighted text messages. Bianca Crowder sat across the table from me. She was one of the senior coordinators who'd been friendly since I started. After the meeting ended, she came over to my desk. You seem stressed. Want to grab coffee after work? I hesitated because I didn't really know her that well and I didn't want to dump my personal problems on a coworker. But she added, I dealt with some family stuff last year. Controlling parent situation. It sucked. Something about the way she said it made me think she might actually understand. So I said yes. We went to a coffee shop 2 blocks from the office. Bianca ordered some complicated latte and I got regular coffee because I couldn't think about choices. We sat at a corner table and she asked what was going on. I meant to give her a vague answer, but instead I told her everything. The interview disaster, my mom getting arrested, the court case, the defense attorney ambushing me with evidence. All of it came pouring out. She didn't look shocked or uncomfortable. She just listened and nodded. When I finished, she said, That's not normal. You know that, right? What your mom did isn't normal mother-daughter stuff. Hearing someone else say it out loud made something loosen in my chest. Bianca became an unexpected ally after that. She offered to drive me to appointments if I needed it. She said she'd help me practice what to say in court. She didn't try to fix everything or give me advice about reconciling with my mom. She just listened and validated that what happened wasn't okay. We started having coffee regularly. She'd check in during work to see how I was doing. It felt weird having someone support me without trying to take over or make it about them. 3 days later, Violet called my cell. She wanted me to come to her office to prepare my testimony. She said we needed to walk through the entire history of my mother's interference from childhood incidents through the interview disruption. That way, we could establish a clear pattern of escalating boundary violations instead of making it look like just one isolated incident. I took a half day off work and met her at the prosecutor's office downtown. She had a legal pad ready and a recorder to document everything I said. She told me to start at the beginning and tell her every major incident I could remember. So I did. In Violet's office the next morning, I sat across from her desk while she pushed a legal pad toward me. She told me to write down every major thing my mom had done, starting from as far back as I could remember. I picked up the pen and stared at the blank page. The playground incident came first. I wrote it down in a few short sentences. Then the science project grade change. The college essay she completely rewrote. The resume she edited without asking. The HR departments she called. Each incident took up a line or two on the page. And as the list grew longer, I started seeing a pattern I had somehow missed my entire life. So every single thing involved her taking over something that was supposed to be mine. Every time I tried to do something on my own, she found a way to insert herself into it. I kept writing until I filled 2 full pages, and when I looked at everything together, I felt sick. This was not normal. This had never been normal. I had just convinced myself it was because she was my mom and moms were supposed to help their kids. But this was not help. Violet leaned forward and started asking questions about each incident. She wanted to know exactly how each one affected me. She wanted to know why I did not just tell my mom no. I tried to explain how every time I pushed back, she would get angry or cry or tell me I was being ungrateful. I tried to explain how I grew up believing I could not do anything right without her fixing it. But as I said the words out loud, they sounded weak and pathetic. I sounded like someone who just let things happen instead of standing up for myself. Violet must have seen the look on my face because she stopped me mid-sentence. She said enmeshment and parental control were actual patterns that courts recognized all the time. She said when those patterns escalated to criminal behavior like trespassing and workplace harassment, judges took them seriously. She said my experience was not just family drama. It was legally actionable behavior. Hearing a prosecutor say that shifted something in my head. For the first time, someone with actual authority was telling me this was not my fault. This was not me being too sensitive or ungrateful. This was my mom crossing legal boundaries. Violet pulled out another folder and slid it across the desk. She said Joaquin had filed a motion claiming I had a history of mental health issues that made me an unreliable witness. The motion was based on things my mom told him. Things about me being anxious and dependent. Things about me always needing her help to function. I stared at the papers and felt something cold settle in my chest. My mom was using my stress responses to her behavior as proof that I was the problem. She was taking every panic attack, every moment of self-doubt she had caused, and turning it into evidence against me. Violet asked if I would be okay with her subpoenaing my college records and contacting my past employers. She said we needed to show the court that I was actually competent and independent when my mom was not interfering. She said we needed concrete evidence to counter the defense narrative. I felt embarrassed thinking about my entire life being examined in court, but I also knew that if we did not fight back, the judge might believe my mom's version of events. So I said yes. That evening back at my apartment, I opened my laptop and started going through old emails. I created a folder and started dragging messages into it. Emails from my mom about school projects. Emails where I asked her not to contact my teachers. Emails where she responded by saying I was being dramatic or hurtful. I found messages to friends asking them not to tell my mom about events I was planning. I found messages to employers apologizing for my mom calling them. Dozens and dozens of messages where I explicitly tried to set boundaries, and she either was ignored them or made me feel guilty for asking. Each email I read made the violation feel bigger. I forwarded the entire folder to Violet with a note explaining what I had found. Then I kept digging. I opened my email account settings to check something that had been bothering me. I went to the security section and looked at the login history. There were logins from IP addresses I did not recognize. Logins from times when I was not at my computer. I clicked on the location data and saw logins from my mom's house. From the past 6 months. From the past year. From the past 3 years. She had been accessing my email account without permission for years. That was how she always knew about job applications before I told her. That was how she knew which companies to call. That was how she found out about the interview I specifically did not tell her about. The violation felt massive. Bigger than the interview disruption. Bigger than the resume editing. This was her reading my private conversations and monitoring my life without my knowledge. I took screenshots of the login history and forwarded them to Violet immediately. She called me back within an hour. She said the unauthorized email access could potentially support additional charges for identity theft or computer fraud. But she wanted to focus on the trespassing case first and use this as evidence of the broader pattern. She told me to change all my passwords right now. She told me to enable 2-factor authentication on every account. She told me to remove my mom from any shared accounts or emergency contacts. I spent the rest of that night and the entire weekend going through every account I had. Email, social media, banking, credit cards, streaming services, everything. I created new passwords using random combinations of letters and numbers that my mom could never guess. I changed all my security questions to answers she would not know. I removed her name from my emergency contacts list. I disabled family sharing on my phone. Each change felt like taking back a small piece of my life that I did not even realize she had taken. By Sunday evening, my digital life was completely locked down. On Monday morning, Roman stopped me in the building lobby. He said someone matching my mom's description had come by over the weekend asking which unit I lived in. He said the building policy was to never confirm resident information to anyone. He said the woman got angry and demanded to speak to a manager, but the front desk staff held firm and eventually she left. I thanked him and went straight back to my apartment to call Violet. She said she would document it as a potential violation of the informal no-contact agreement we had discussed. She said if my mom tried to contact me or show up again, I should call her immediately. I hung up feeling both grateful for the protection and rattled that my mom was actively trying to find me. The next Monday morning, my phone rang while I was getting ready for work. Milo from HR. My stomach dropped before I even answered. He told me my mother had called the company's main line on Friday afternoon. She claimed there was a family emergency and demanded to speak with me immediately. The receptionist followed protocol perfectly. She refused to transfer the call. She refused to confirm I even worked there. She documented the entire attempt in the system. Milo said he was adding it to my file in case we needed evidence later. I thanked him and hung up feeling sick. My mother was still trying to reach me through any channel she could find. I forwarded the information to Violet right away. That afternoon, I had my first appointment with Heather Garza, the therapist Violet recommended. Her office was in a quiet building downtown with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. Heather was maybe 50, with kind eyes and a calm way of speaking that immediately put me at ease. She asked me basic background questions first, then said she wanted to try something. She asked me to describe my relationship with my mother without using the word love. I opened my mouth to answer and realized I had no idea what to say. I sat there for a full minute trying to find words. Finally, I started talking about obligation, about feeling responsible for her happiness, about the constant fear of making her angry, about how exhausting it was trying to manage her emotions all the time, about guilt that followed me everywhere. Heather wrote notes while I talked, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she looked up and said that everything I described was about my mother's needs, not mine. She asked what I got from the relationship. I couldn't think of a single thing. Heather explained something called enmeshment. She said it's when a parent never develops the ability to see their child as a separate person. The parent treats the child like an extension of themselves. The child's needs, boundaries, and feelings don't register as real or important. It's different from healthy interdependence where family members support each other while respecting individual autonomy. My mother never learned to do that. She genuinely believed she had the right to control every aspect of my life because she couldn't tell where she ended and I began. Heather gave me homework. Write down every single time this week that I felt responsible for my mother's feelings or actions. Every time I worried about her reaction to something. Every time I felt guilty for having my own thoughts or making my own choices. I looked at the blank notebook she handed me and knew I would fill pages. Back at work the next day, Olivia called me into her office. She said she was assigning me lead on a major marketing campaign that would require presenting to the senior leadership team in 2 weeks. It was exactly the kind of opportunity I had dreamed about. But my immediate reaction was pure anxiety. My hand actually moved toward my phone. I wanted to call my mother and ask her opinion on the strategy. I wanted her to review my presentation slides. I wanted her approval before I did anything. I caught myself mid-reach and pulled my hand back. This was exactly what Heather had talked about. The automatic instinct to check with my mother before trusting my own judgment. I forced myself to thank Olivia and accept the project. I walked back to my desk feeling shaky but determined. I could do this myself. I had to. The 2 weeks flew by in a blur of research, planning, and slide design. I worked late most nights, second-guessing every choice but pushing through anyway. Bianca helped me practice the presentation in an empty conference room the day before. The actual presentation went better than I expected. The senior leadership team asked good questions. I answered them clearly. They seemed genuinely interested in my ideas. Afterward, Olivia pulled me aside in the hallway. She said she was really impressed with my strategic thinking and clear communication. She said I had done an excellent job. The praise felt weird and uncomfortable. I immediately started deflecting. I said it was nothing special. I said I probably could have done better on the budget projections. I said I got lucky with the timing. Olivia gave me a strange look but didn't push it. Later that week, Bianca and I were having lunch in the break room when she brought it up. She said she noticed I seemed uncomfortable whenever anyone complimented my work. She pointed out that I deflected every piece of positive feedback. She said I apologized constantly even when I hadn't done anything wrong. She asked if I realized I did that. I felt my face get hot. I made some excuse about just being modest. Bianca shook her head. She said there's a difference between being modest and refusing to acknowledge your own competence. She challenged me to accept one compliment this week without minimizing it or changing the subject. Just say thank you and stop talking. It sounded impossible, but I agreed to try. My next therapy session, Heather and I talked about the upcoming court hearing. I admitted I was terrified of testifying against my mother. I felt like doing so made me a bad daughter. Like I was betraying her. Like I should just drop the charges and try to work things out privately. Heather let me talk for a while, then asked a simple question. What kind of mother puts her child in a position where they have to testify in criminal court about her behavior? I stopped mid-sentence. I had never thought about it that way. I had been so focused on my guilt about testifying that I never considered my mother's responsibility for creating the situation in the first place. She was the one who forced her way into my interview. She was the one who refused to leave when asked. She was the one who got arrested. None of that was my fault. Heather said I needed to stop taking responsibility for my mother's choices and their consequences. The next afternoon, Violet called with an update. Joaquin was threatening to countersue me and Olivia for defamation. He claimed we conspired to damage my mother's reputation by having her arrested. My heart started racing. I immediately panicked about dragging Olivia into my family mess. She had been so kind and supportive. Now she might have to pay legal fees because of me. I might cost her money. I might damage her reputation. Violet said it was just an intimidation tactic with no legal merit. She said Joaquin was trying to scare me into backing down. But I couldn't stop thinking about Olivia getting pulled into court because she tried to help me. I sent Olivia a frantic apology email as soon as I got off the phone with Violet. I said I was so sorry for dragging her into this. I said I would understand if she wanted to distance herself from the case. I said I would pay her legal fees if it came to that. She responded within an hour. Her email was direct and matter-of-fact. She said she had excellent lawyers. She said this was exactly the kind of baseless threat she expected from someone like my mother's attorney. She said I should focus on my own case rather than trying to protect her from consequences of her own decision to help me. She said she made that choice knowing full well what might happen. Her refusal to let me take responsibility for my mother's actions was both reassuring and disorienting. I read the email 3 times trying to accept that she wasn't angry with me. The week before the hearing, Violet forwarded me a new plea offer from Joaquin. My mother would plead guilty to trespassing. She would accept probation and mandatory counseling. But I had to agree in writing not to pursue a restraining order or any civil claims against her. Violet said the decision was completely mine, but she advised me to think carefully about what I was giving up. The counseling mandate sounded good, but there were no enforcement mechanisms. No way to make sure my mother actually went or took it seriously. And giving up my right to a restraining order could leave me vulnerable to future harassment. What would stop my mother from showing up at my apartment or workplace again once the probation ended? Violet said I should take a few days to think about what I actually needed to feel safe, not just what sounded reasonable on paper. The next day, Violet connected me with Kaylee Newton, the court victim advocate assigned to my case. We met in a small office at the courthouse that smelled like old coffee and cleaning supplies. Kaylee had a stack of papers in front of her and a calm way of explaining things that made me feel less panicked about the whole process. She walked me through what would happen at the hearing, who would be there, what questions the judge might ask. Then she pulled out the plea offer Joaquin had sent and went through it line by line with me. She asked what each part would actually do to protect me in real life, not just what it said on paper. The probation sounded good, but there was no way to make sure my mother actually followed through. The counseling had no checking system to see if she went or took it seriously. And giving up my right to ask for a restraining order later felt like tying my own hands if she started bothering me again after probation ended. Kaylee asked me what I actually needed to feel safe, and I realized nobody had asked me that question before. Everyone kept telling me what was fair or reasonable, but nobody asked what would let me sleep at night without worrying about my mother showing up at my apartment or job. I started thinking out loud about what real protection would look like. A no-contact order that covered my workplace so she couldn't call or visit. Required therapy for my mother with reports sent to the court so someone was checking if she was actually working on her issues. The ability to get a restraining order if she broke the rules without having to start the whole legal process over from the beginning. Kaylee wrote everything down and helped me organize my thoughts into clear points I could give to Violet. She explained that I had the right to ask for these things, that wanting protection didn't make me a bad daughter, that the court's job was to keep people safe, not just punish them. By the end of the meeting, I had a list of specific requirements written in my own handwriting that felt solid and real instead of vague hopes that my mother would change. Violet called Joaquin that afternoon with my counter requirements. She put the call on speaker so I could hear his response. He got quiet for a minute after she finished reading my list, then said my mother wouldn't agree to a no-contact order because it was too harsh for a mother-daughter relationship. He said it would damage our bond and prevent natural healing. I felt that familiar guilt start creeping in, the automatic response that I was being too mean, asking for too much. But then I thought about what Kaylee had said about my right to feel safe. I told Violet to tell him that his response was exactly why I needed the protection. If my mother still thought she had the right to contact me whenever she wanted, if she still saw boundaries as damage instead of basic respect, then she hadn't learned anything. She still believed she could do whatever she wanted, and I had to accept it because we're family. Violet repeated my words to Joaquin almost exactly, and I could hear him getting frustrated on the other end. He said he'd talk to his client and get back to us. 3 days before the hearing, I came home from work to find a thick envelope waiting at Roman's building. The return address was my old apartment, the one I'd shared with my mother before all this started. My hands shook opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter on the flowered notepaper my mother always used. 3 pages front and back in her careful cursive. It started with an apology for going too far at the interview, saying she got carried away trying to help me succeed. But by the second paragraph, she was talking about how hurt she felt that I had her arrested, how I'd turned Olivia and everyone else against her, how ungrateful I was after everything she'd sacrificed for me. The third page switched back to begging, saying we should work this out as a family instead of letting strangers in court decide our relationship. She said she loved me and just wanted her daughter back. Reading it made my chest tight and my eyes sting. Part of me wanted to call her right then and tell her it was okay, that we could fix this. The other part recognized every manipulation trick Heather had warned me about in therapy. I brought the letter to my session with Heather the next day. She read it carefully, then pointed out how my mother took almost no real responsibility for her actions. The apology was vague and immediately followed by blaming me for the consequences. She centered her own hurt feelings instead of acknowledging the harm she'd caused. She framed my boundary setting as a betrayal of family rather than a reasonable response to her behavior. Heather said the letter was actually perfect evidence of why I needed the protection I was asking for, because it showed my mother still didn't understand what she'd done wrong. Then Heather gave me an assignment that made me nervous. She wanted me to write a response letter that I would never send, just to practice saying what I really thought without worrying about managing my mother's reaction. I agreed, but felt weird about it. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank notebook, trying to write the letter. Every sentence I started felt too mean, so I'd cross it out and try again softer. I kept editing myself to sound less angry, more understanding, automatically trying to make my mother feel better even though she'd never read this. After an hour, I had half a page of watered-down nothing that didn't say anything real. I texted Heather feeling frustrated and she called me back immediately. She told me to start over and write it again without any softening language. Just pure, honest reaction to everything my mother had done. No apologies, no explanations, no making her feel better. Just what I actually felt. I hung up and started writing again, and this time the words poured out fast and angry. I wrote about being 10 years old and watching her push a kid off a swing, about the shame of having teachers and employers contacted behind my back, about the interview she ruined and the job I almost lost. I wrote about how exhausting it was to manage her emotions all the time, how I'd spent my whole life trying to keep her happy instead of building my own life. I wrote that I was done, that I didn't owe her access to me just because she was my mother, that love didn't mean letting someone control and interfere with everything. When I finished, my hand was cramping and I'd filled 6 pages. Reading it back shocked me because I'd never let myself think those things so clearly before, let alone write them down. The anger was so raw and huge that I felt scared of it. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I kept running through what I'd say if the judge asked me questions, worrying I'd freeze up or say something that made me sound like the problem instead of my mother. I rehearsed answers in my head over and over until they stopped sounding like real words. Around 9, Bianca texted asking how I was doing. I admitted I was freaking out, and she showed up at my door 20 minutes later with Chinese takeout and a plan to distract me. We ate on my couch, and she put on the trashiest reality show she could find, some dating competition where everyone was yelling and throwing drinks. It was so ridiculous that I actually forgot about court for whole minutes at a time. Bianca didn't try to give me advice or tell me it would be fine. She just sat with me and made sarcastic comments about the people on TV until I was laughing instead of panicking. She stayed until almost midnight, and after she left, I was tired enough to finally fall asleep. Morning of the hearing, I put on the professional clothes Olivia had helped me pick out last week. Navy pants and a white shirt that made me look competent and put together. I met Violet outside the courthouse at 8:30. She was carrying a leather folder and looked completely calm, which helped settle my nerves a little. We sat on a bench in the hallway, and she reviewed the key points of my testimony one more time. She reminded me that I wasn't on trial, that my mother's behavior was what the judge would be looking at, not my reaction to it. She said to answer questions directly and honestly, to take my time if I needed to think, and to remember that everything I was asking for was reasonable protection that anyone would need in this situation. Her confidence made me feel like maybe I could actually do this. Inside the courtroom, I saw my mother for the first time since security dragged her out of Olivia's office. She was sitting at a table with Joaquin, and she looked smaller than I remembered. Older too, with new lines around her eyes. She saw me come in and her whole face changed, going soft and pleading. She tried to catch my eye and hold it, and I felt that old familiar pull to go comfort her and make everything okay between us. My body wanted to walk over there and hug her and tell her we could work it out, but I made myself look at Violet instead, focusing on her solid presence beside me. The judge came in and everyone stood up, He was an older man with gray hair and reading glasses, and he looked tired like he'd already sat through a dozen cases that morning. He called the hearing to order and asked if both sides were ready to proceed. Before Violet could answer, Joaquin stood up and requested a recess to discuss a potential resolution. I could see my mother whispering to him urgently, her hand gripping his arm. She kept shooting desperate looks in my direction like she was trying to send me a message I was supposed to understand. The judge nodded and called a 15-minute recess. Everyone stood as he left through the side door. Joaquin immediately walked over to where Violet and I were sitting. He had a legal pad covered in handwritten notes. He asked if we could talk privately about a revised offer. Violet looked at me first, checking if I was okay with it, which surprised me because nobody usually asked what I wanted. We followed him to a small conference room down the hall. The room had a table and 4 chairs and smelled like old coffee. Joaquin sat across from us and flipped through his notes. He said his client was willing to plead guilty to the trespassing charge. She would accept probation and mandatory counseling with quarterly progress reports submitted to the court. He said they would also agree to a limited no-contact order. Written communication would be allowed through attorneys only, but no in-person contact or phone calls. He looked at me while he explained the terms, probably trying to see if I would accept it. Violet didn't say anything at first. She turned to me and asked what I thought about the offer. It was the first time in my entire life that someone with authority asked what I actually wanted, instead of just telling me what I should accept. My throat felt tight. I looked down at my hands for a second to think. I told Violet I wanted the no-contact order to include workplace protection. Any attempts to contact my office should be documented as violations. I also wanted any written communication to be approved by my mother's therapist first. The therapist needed to confirm the content was appropriate and respected boundaries before it could be sent. Joaquin's expression changed. He said that was too restrictive and my mother had the right to communicate with her daughter. Violet started to respond, but the judge walked past the open doorway. He must have heard Joaquin's raised voice because he stopped and looked in. He asked if there was a problem reaching an agreement. Joaquin said we were just working through some details. The judge stepped into the doorway. He said if they couldn't reach an agreement in the next 10 minutes, we would proceed to testimony. The full pattern of behavior would become part of the public record. He looked directly at my mother's attorney when he said it. Then he continued down the hall toward his chambers. Joaquin's face went pale. He excused himself and went back to the courtroom where my mother was waiting. Through the window in the door, I could see them having an intense whispered conversation. My mother kept shaking her head and gesturing with her hands. She looked panicked. Her face was red and she kept glancing toward our conference room. Joaquin was leaning close and talking fast, probably explaining what the judge said about testimony. After about 5 minutes, they both came back. My mother wouldn't look at me directly. Joaquin said his client agreed to all the terms: workplace protection and therapist approval for any communication. Violet asked him to confirm it on the record. He nodded and said yes. They accepted the complete terms as stated. We went back into the courtroom. The judge returned and asked if an agreement had been reached. Joaquin stood and outlined the terms for the record. Guilty plea to criminal trespassing. 12 months probation. Mandatory counseling with a licensed therapist specializing in boundary issues. Quarterly progress reports submitted to the court. No contact order including no workplace contact, no in-person meetings, no phone calls. Written communication only through attorneys and only after therapist approval, confirming appropriate content. The judge asked my mother if she understood and agreed to these terms. She said yes in a quiet voice. He asked if anyone forced or coerced her into this agreement. She said no. The judge accepted the plea and issued a formal order. He explained that any violation would result in immediate consequences, including possible jail time. He said the order was effective immediately upon leaving the courtroom. My mother's hands were shaking as she signed the paperwork. I signed my copy with Violet's pen. The whole thing took maybe 10 minutes. Then it was done. We walked out into the hallway. I felt strange, like my body was moving, but my brain was somewhere else. My mother was a few steps behind us with Joaquin. I heard her footsteps getting closer. She called my name. Violet immediately stepped between us. She reminded my mother that the no-contact order was effective immediately. Any attempt to approach me was a violation. My mother's face crumpled. Her eyes filled with tears. She said she just wanted to tell me she loved me. Her voice broke on the last word. The guilt hit me so hard I almost couldn't breathe. This was exactly what Heather had warned me about. The crying, the broken voice, the claim that she just wanted to express love. But it was manipulation. I knew that. Heather had explained it in our last session. My mother wasn't crying because she felt sorry for what she did. She was crying because she lost control. Still, seeing her cry made my chest hurt. Kaylee appeared beside me. She must have been waiting in the hallway. She gently touched my elbow and guided me toward a side exit. My mother called after me again. Kaylee kept walking and I followed her. We went through a door marked staff only and down a back staircase. My legs felt weak. We came out in the parking lot behind the courthouse. The fresh air hit my face. Everything I had been holding in during the hearing suddenly came pouring out. I started crying so hard I couldn't catch my breath. Kaylee didn't try to stop me or tell me it was okay. She just stood there while I fell apart. After a few minutes, she handed me some tissues from her bag. She waited until my breathing slowed down. Then she said having boundaries doesn't make me a bad person. Even when someone cries about those boundaries. Even when that someone is my mother. The relief and guilt were fighting each other in my chest. I felt free and terrible at the same time. Kaylee stayed with me until I could breathe normally again. She asked if I had a ride home. I nodded and pointed to my car across the lot. She walked me over and waited until I got in and started the engine. I drove back to my apartment and sat on the couch for 2 hours staring at nothing. The next day I went to work. I felt exhausted but also lighter somehow. Milo called me into his office mid-morning. He had printed copies of the no-contact order. He said he already updated the reception protocols. Anyone matching my mother's description would not be allowed past the lobby. Any phone calls from her would not be transferred. Every attempt would be documented and reported immediately. He asked if I wanted him to brief the security team. I said yes. Having concrete systems in place to protect me made me feel safer than I had in months. Knowing there were actual procedures and people watching out for violations was huge. Olivia stopped by my desk after lunch. She asked how the hearing went. I gave her the basic summary. Guilty plea, probation, counseling, no contact order. She nodded and said that sounded like a good outcome. Then she said she was planning to recommend me for a promotion to senior marketing coordinator in the next review cycle. I stared at her. I thought the drama with my mother would have hurt my professional reputation. Everyone knew about the interview incident. But Olivia said my ability to handle a personal crisis while maintaining work quality showed exactly the kind of strength and professionalism she valued. She said I never let my personal situation affect my work performance or team relationships. That mattered more than having a difficult family situation. I didn't know what to say. I just thanked her. After she left, I sat at my desk feeling stunned. I had my therapy appointment with Heather that evening. We spent the whole session processing the hearing outcome. I told her about my mother crying in the courthouse hallway, how seeing her cry made me feel like I was doing something wrong. Heather explained that my mother's distress was real, but it was distress about losing control, not real regret about the harm she caused. She said I wasn't responsible for managing my mother's adjustment to appropriate boundaries. That was my mother's work to do with her own therapist. Heather asked how I felt about the no-contact order now that I had some distance from the courthouse. I said relieved mostly, and guilty for feeling relieved. She said both feelings could be true at the same time. Over the next few days, I started noticing something weird about myself. I apologized constantly at work. Sorry for asking a question. Sorry for needing someone to repeat something. Sorry for existing in a space someone else wanted to walk through. I was taking blame for things that weren't my fault, or weren't anyone's fault at all. Bianca started gently calling it out when she heard me do it. She would say, "What are you apologizing for?" in a kind voice. It was embarrassing, but it helped me become more aware of the pattern. I was trying to make myself smaller and less troublesome, trying to avoid anyone being upset with me. 2 weeks after the hearing, Violet called. She said my mother's therapist had submitted the first progress report to the court. It was concerning. My mother spent most of the sessions talking about how hurt she was. She focused on feeling rejected and misunderstood. The therapist's notes said my mother showed limited insight into how her behavior affected me. She wasn't examining her boundary violations or control patterns, just processing her own feelings of loss. The therapist recommended continued treatment and noted that real progress would require my mother to shift focus from her hurt feelings to understanding the impact of her actions. Violet said this was common in these cases. Change takes time. I thanked her for the update and hung up. I wasn't surprised exactly, but I was disappointed. Some part of me had hoped the court order would make my mother suddenly understand what she did wrong. That hope felt stupid now. My next therapy session with Heather happened 3 days later. I sat on her couch and told her about the progress report. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked what I was hoping to hear from that report. I said I wanted my mother to understand what she did wrong. Heather nodded and wrote something in her notes. She asked if I thought my mother would ever fully understand. I paused because I'd never really considered that she might not. Heather explained that some people never develop that level of self-awareness. She said I could spend years waiting for my mother to change, or I could focus on maintaining my boundaries regardless of whether she ever got it. That felt different somehow, like permission to stop waiting. She gave me a new assignment for the week. Every time I caught myself hoping my mother would change, I should redirect that energy towards something I could actually control. My own boundaries, my own responses, my own life choices. It sounded simple, but it felt huge. At work the following week, the campaign I'd been managing for 3 months finally went live. I'd been tracking the metrics obsessively since launch day. The engagement numbers were higher than our initial projections. The conversion rate exceeded our target by almost 20%. Olivia called a team meeting to review the results. She pulled up the data on the conference room screen and walked through each metric. Then she turned to me and said, "My strategic planning made this possible." She specifically mentioned my market research and audience targeting. The whole team clapped. I felt my face get hot, but I didn't deflect or minimize it. I just said thank you. After the meeting, Olivia stopped me in the hallway. She said the executive team was impressed. I'd proven I could lead major projects independently. For the first time, I felt proud of something that was completely mine. No interference, no input I didn't ask for. Just my work. 2 days later, Bianca stopped by my desk during lunch. She asked if I wanted to join her and some friends for a hiking trip that weekend. I hesitated. The thought of meeting new people made my stomach tight. What if they asked about my family? What if someone knew about the court case? Bianca must have seen my face because she said it would be low-key. Just an easy trail and lunch after. I agreed before I could talk myself out of it. Saturday morning, I met Bianca and 4 of her friends at the trailhead. They were all friendly and normal. We started hiking and people chatted about work and shows they were watching. About an hour in, someone asked if my parents lived nearby. My chest got tight, but I managed to say we weren't in contact right now. The woman just nodded and said that must be hard sometimes. Then someone else started talking about a restaurant they tried last week. That was it. No questions. No judgment. Just a normal response to a normal boundary. The hike itself was actually fun. The trail wound through trees and opened up to views of the valley. We stopped at the top to eat sandwiches and take photos. I realized I'd been avoiding situations like this for years. I was always scared my mother would somehow find out and show up, or that she'd embarrass me in front of new people, or that someone would ask about her and I'd have to explain the whole mess. But these people only knew me as I was now. They didn't know about the playground incident or the college essay or the interview disaster. I could just be myself without carrying all that history. It felt like trying on a different version of my life. The next week, Roman knocked on my apartment door one evening. He said my temporary housing arrangement was ending in 6 weeks. I needed to decide if I wanted to renew or find something else. 6 months ago, that conversation would have sent me into a panic spiral. I would have called my mother immediately. Let her take over the apartment search. Let her make all the decisions because I didn't trust myself. But now I felt something different. Excitement, maybe. The idea of choosing my own place without anyone's input actually sounded good. I told Roman I'd start looking for a new apartment. He said to let him know if I needed any recommendations for neighborhoods. I started apartment hunting that weekend. I made a list of what I needed. 1 bedroom, in my budget, close to work, safe neighborhood. I scrolled through listings online and scheduled tours. The first place was too expensive. The second had a weird smell. The third was perfect. Small 1-bedroom with big windows and updated kitchen. The building had secure entry and parking. I filled out the application myself. Put down my own information, my own references, my own income verification. No one else's name anywhere on the forms. 3 days later, the landlord called. I was approved. I signed the lease at his office the following week. When I walked out with my copy of the signed paperwork, I felt this surge of accomplishment that seemed too big for the task. I mentioned it to Heather at our next session. She said signing my own lease was actually a huge deal. For someone who was never allowed to make decisions without interference, this was a major step. She was right. It was. A few weeks later, Violet sent me an email. My mother's second progress report came in from her therapist. There was slight improvement. She was starting to admit that her behavior at the interview was wrong, but she kept framing it as trying too hard to help rather than recognizing the actual control and boundary problems. The therapist wrote that this counted as progress. She recommended continuing treatment. I read the email twice. It was better than the first report, but still not real insight. Still not actual understanding. But I wasn't waiting for that anymore. I was just maintaining my boundaries regardless. Moving day arrived faster than I expected. Bianca and 3 coworkers showed up at Roman's building with their cars. We loaded boxes and furniture and drove everything to my new place. I was careful about who got my new address. I didn't post anything on social media, didn't tell anyone who might share the information with my mother. This apartment was mine and she didn't know where it was. That felt like the strongest boundary I'd ever set. A physical space she couldn't access or even locate. We finished moving by late afternoon. Everyone left and I stood in my new living room surrounded by boxes. It was quiet. It was mine. It felt safe. 3 months passed. Work stayed busy and good. I led 2 more successful campaigns, built strong relationships with my team, stopped apologizing for things that weren't my fault. Then Olivia called me into her office one Tuesday morning. She said I was promoted to senior marketing coordinator. Significant raise. More responsibility. She told me I earned it through excellent work and strong leadership on recent projects. I accepted the praise without deflecting. Without saying it was no big deal or that other people helped more than me. I just said thank you and that I was excited about the new role. That week in therapy, Heather brought up something new. She asked what healthy family relationships might look like in the future. I tensed up immediately. She clarified that I wasn't required to have any contact with my mother, even if my mother finished therapy, even if she learned to respect boundaries. The choice was always mine. But she wanted me to think about what I might want someday, not what I should want or what would make other people happy, what would actually feel right for me. I said I wasn't ready to think about reconciliation. Heather nodded. She said that was completely valid. But maybe I could start imagining a future where my mother's behavior didn't define my whole life, where I had my own career and friends and home and those things mattered more than the dysfunction I grew up with. That idea felt possible in a way it never had before. 6 months after the hearing, I sat in the same courtroom for my mother's probation review. The judge reviewed her file and noted that she'd followed every requirement of the no-contact order. No attempted visits, no phone calls, no messages through other people. Her therapist submitted a written report that the judge read aloud in summary. My mother was attending weekly sessions without missing appointments. She was starting to understand that her behavior at the interview crossed boundaries. But the report also said she still struggled to see the full pattern of control throughout my life. She could admit the interview was wrong, but couldn't connect it to everything else she'd done. The therapist recommended continuing treatment because insight was developing, but changing actual behavior would take more time. I read the email version twice later. It was better than I expected, but still not real understanding. After the judge finished reviewing the compliance record, Violet stood and addressed the court. She asked if I wanted to modify the no-contact order to allow supervised communication through therapists. The judge looked at me and waited. I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. I wasn't ready. I didn't feel guilty about that anymore. Heather had spent months helping me understand that reconciliation had to happen on my timeline, not anyone else's. I told the judge I wanted to keep the order as it was. The judge nodded and extended the no-contact order for another full year with the same terms. My mother's attorney looked disappointed but didn't argue. I left the courthouse feeling steady instead of shaky. At work, everything kept getting better. I led 3 major campaigns over those months, and each one performed well. My team respected my decisions. Olivia assigned me more responsibility, and I handled it without panicking or second-guessing myself constantly. I stopped apologizing for things that weren't my fault. When someone complimented my work, I said thank you instead of deflecting. Olivia became the kind of mentor I didn't know existed. She gave direct feedback without making me feel stupid. She set clear expectations and trusted me to meet them. She modeled what healthy boundaries looked like in professional relationships. No guilt trips, no manipulation, just clear communication and mutual respect. I watched how she handled difficult conversations and started using the same approaches with my own team members. One Saturday morning, I woke up in my apartment without an alarm. I made coffee and sat on my couch looking out the window. I didn't check my phone anxiously. I didn't worry about unexpected visitors. I didn't feel that constant low-level dread that used to follow me everywhere. I just sat there drinking coffee and thinking about what I wanted to do that day. Go to the farmer's market maybe. Meet Bianca for lunch. Work on the new campaign proposal. Normal things. Easy things. Things I chose because I wanted to do them. That's when I realized this quiet, peaceful feeling was what safety actually felt like. Not excitement or relief or victory. Just calm. Just knowing that my space was mine and my choices were mine, and nobody was going to burst through the door trying to control everything. My relationship with my mother might never be what I wished it could be when I was younger. She might never fully understand what she did or why it was harmful. But I'd built a life that was genuinely mine. I had work I was proud of. Friends who respected my boundaries. A home where I felt safe. People around me who supported my independence instead of trying to take it away. And sitting there on my couch that Saturday morning, I realized that was enough.